Emotions are at an all-time high, and it only adds and complements to the importance behind the fight that is just over 24 hours away from us. Welcome back to the Tomatoito Show. Let's talk Jermell Charlo versus Brian Castano. Let's get right into it. This is going to be a unification bout. All 4 titles are going to be on the line, and we are going to have our first ever undisputed champion in the 154-pound division since dating back to the 4-belt era. There's been undisputed champs before. There's been unified champs before in that division. The last, of course, that comes to mind was Winky Wright in the early 2000s. And we've had undisputed champs in the past, and the most recent to accomplish that feat was in the 140-pound division, and that was Josh Taylor earlier this year when he defeated Jose Ramirez, and now owns all 4 titles along with that coveted Ring Magazine championship. Now we're gonna have it in the 154-pound division, in the Super-Welterweight or junior middleweight division, however it is that you consider it. The 154 has been packed with talent as far as I could remember. Since I was a kid, I mean, we're looking at the who's that have gone through that division. And then when I started paying attention to boxing as I was getting a little bit older, you start seeing the Vernon Forrests go through that division. In the later stages of De La Hoya's career, he was in there. Ricardo Mayorga, Sergio Mora, who ended up defeating Vernon Forrest. Ricardo Mayorga, Vernon Forrest had wars. Shane Mosley went through there. And then more recently, of course, Canelo ended up going through there. Boo Boo Andrade, Jermell Charlo, who is now a champ at 154. Paul Williams, Antonio Margarito, Shane Mosley. Pacquiao ended up fighting Margarito, a one-time stint in that division. Cotto ended up fighting in that division. So it's a storied division. It's had some of the biggest names go through that division. Tito Trinidad fought in that division as well. Listen, it's one of the favorite divisions around. Anytime anything from 135 up, it starts mixing up. It becomes a big like a big salsa, because these fighters are big enough to be able to move up. Some of them can't, but a lot of them end up moving up. Shane Mosley, when he was campaigning at 135, ended up taking that leap to challenge De La Hoya, all the way to a 2-division leap to challenge De La Hoya back in 2000. And that was to inaugurate the Staples Center in Los Angeles. So there's been some big fights, some big fighters, some big names that have come out and come through this 154-pound division. From the 135 all the way to the 160, those have always been my favorite divisions. Now 168 has a lot of noise around it. And then, of course, the heavyweights. The heavyweights is the traditional. Those are the traditional fights. That's where Rocky ended up fighting, right? In the movies, even though they were fiction, but that's where Rocky was fighting. He was campaigning at heavyweight. He was a heavyweight champ, and kind of a small guy for a heavyweight champ. But listen, it was a movie, right? A movie franchise at that. But listen, I mean, you got the 154-pound division that is setting the boxing world on fire at the moment. Emotions are at an all-time high. The weigh-in just took place, and it was heated. There was exchanges of profanity, exchanges of, you name it. I mean, it was just between the two camps. The intensity is there. The nervousness, you could sense it. It's in the air. It's the moment. You could sense the moment. You could sense the importance behind this fight, and both camps were feeling it. Castano ended up staying fairly calm at the weigh-in today, but what a change from yesterday's press conference to today's weigh-in. What a change in atmosphere, because although you could sense Charlo being Jermell was very short with his answers. He was a couple of times that he ended up elaborating a little bit, but he's always been very short. Castano was a little bit more talkative. Of course, they had to deal with translations, but you could tell that Jermell was on edge, especially there was a question where they ended up asking and translating something, and he ended up biting back at the translator, telling him, like, is that for me or is that for him? Is that for me or is that for him? All right. Just want to make sure. And then it was actually a question for him. He ended up answering it, but he was already on edge. He's a ball of emotion. Jermell Charlo, of the two twins, he's the more emotional one. He carries his emotions on his sleeve. He's a ticking time bomb. He's ready to snap at any moment. And so far it's paid off. I mean, the man has one blemish to his record, and we're going to get into that right now. But other than that, he's been perfect for the majority of his career. The two twins do set aside. You could definitely tell them apart by their fighting styles. And as confusing as it is with the two twins, because if you've ever spoken about identical twins, these two guys are it. It's so hard to tell them apart. It's taken years for me to be able to figure out who's who. Even though I watch their fights, I tune into their fights, and then the camera sways over to the crowd or to the corner where the brother will be at, and the brother that's not fighting, of course. And then I'll be like, I have no idea who that was, like, unless the commentators say it, right? Obviously, because we know who's supposed to be in the ring that night. But yeah, it's confusing. But with all that said, as you start paying attention to their fighting styles through the years, you're able to tell who's who, and their personalities, their fighting styles, their approach to the game, the way they carry themselves. That's what separates the two brothers. So as linked as they are, they are walking different paths. Jermell Charlo, a ball of emotion, and it showed today. It showed today during the weigh-in. So there was a little bit of controversy during the weigh-in today. Both fighters made weight, and yes, we do have a fight going on tomorrow. A unification bout for the undisputed throne at 154 will take place. Both fighters made weight. Weights were accredited and validated, but there was a little bit of controversy, and the controversy happened when Brian Castano stepped onto the scale. Now, if you watch this, there's a video on there. I'm not sure which channel, I guess I should say, or entity ended up putting it up. It might have been, I don't want to get it wrong, but I want to say it was Fight Hub that I ended up watching it from. And it was just because it was a quick glimpse. It was the first thing that popped up. But I ended up going to Showtime. Showtime had it in full length, and I think Showtime did nearly an hour of coverage on the weigh-in. Now that would be the official one, right? Showtime's going to be hosting this. It's going to be live at the San Antonio AT&T Center, and the controversy happened when Brian Castano stepped on the scale. You actually, if you go back and watch it, you see him wobble a little bit, almost as if he's off balance on a steady surface. The scale, no matter how small it is, if you're standing on it correctly, you shouldn't be wobbling off of it. He ended up wobbling a little bit. He was slightly off balance. You could see Derek James on the side as you're looking at the screen. To the left of the screen, Derek James is there with a representative from the Castano team, maybe his manager. I'm not sure who the gentleman is. And then Jermell Charlo was there. So they're discussing, and you could see clearly Derek James pointing down at the scale at Castano's feet, and as he wobbles. Now, if you're wobbling, I don't know, it was maybe unintentional. Let's say it's unintentional because there's no proof up to this moment from the moment that I'm recording this. I haven't seen really anything else pop up on it. Let's just say that it was unintentional. But listen, if you don't step on the scale correctly, and you're stepping with the outside of your feet, or you're stepping on the ball of your feet, or you're stepping on your heels and lifting your toes in the front of the feet, you're bound to throw the scale off balance, and it may either hinder you or save you. But there's all kinds of tricks to this game, and it may very well save you a few ounces in case you're doubting yourself and you think you're going to be a little bit heavier than what you anticipate. So nobody should be wobbling on the scale. Maybe let's just say it's unintentional, but it's noticeable that he did that. And then he gained his footing. As he gained his balance, you could see Derek James really pointing towards it and commenting on it. And the gentleman from Castano's team begins to argue with them. Jermell interrupts the conversation. He begins exchanging words and dialogue back and forth with that gentleman. They exchange barbs. Then they have to separate them. Then they start restraining them, one to one side, one to the other. They continue to exchange. The profanity starts flying back and forth. Castano gets off the scale, and it was a whole scene to witness. Jermell's wife begins screaming at a crowd. There was actually a decent-sized crowd for as small of a room as it was. There was a decent-sized following that Castano attracted there, and they were engaged in the traditional soccer chants with their soccer Argentinian team jerseys. There was a drum, and they overtook that entire room. They were noticeable. They let their voices be heard. They let their support be heard, and they took over the room. They were loud. I guess if obviously for the Jermell team, for the Charlo team, that would have been obnoxious because they were just overbearing with their chants. But for the Castano team, it was really cool because there was more people there for Jermell than there was for the Castano team. So this kind of made up for it, right? It kind of balanced things out. They were loud. They were in your face. There was nothing profane about it. It was a traditional soccer chant that they were cheering, and that they were engaging in, I guess. And Jermell's wife at one point stands up and starts screaming back at the Argentinian fans, telling them, "We're going to take your title. We're going to take his title. We're going to take your title." And she's engaging them. So she was obviously getting annoyed. It was a big scene. Jermell ends up falling, or not falling, but jumping off the stage, trying to engage the gentleman from Castano's team. And it was a whole scene. They had to restrain them, all kinds of people running on stage. And then the stare down happens. And when they come together, Jermell ends up basically protesting something towards Castano, telling him something about his team or how they were out of control. So just pointing the finger at him. So you could tell that it bothered Jermell, whereas Castano was cool and collected, had a smirk on his face, just nodded his head, and the stare down was as intense as ever. And if this fight was not, if the implications weren't important, I mean, you could tell now that they're both feeling it. You could tell that it's playing games in their head. It's playing games on the heads of the team also, their respective teams. And there's a lot of emotion, a lot of mind games going on, a lot of feeling behind this fight, and everybody knows the importance behind this fight. This is going to be a unification. We saw this similar with the Josh Taylor Ramirez teams, where they engaged each other in the lobby of the hotel, outside of the elevators, and this is as big as it gets, guys. Whenever there's going to be a unification for all the belts in one division, and you're bound to have a king named tomorrow, and in 24 hours' time, you're going to have a king of that division, of the 154-pound division, and the first ever to accomplish it, dating back to when the four-belt era began. This is big. The importance behind this, I'm surprised that more people don't know about it. If you're a boxing fan, if you're a sports fan, you know about this fight. If you're just a casual that tunes in every so often, you most likely don't know about this. They haven't done a very good job promoting this fight. Showtime has catered to the fans, to their loyal fans. And on YouTube, unless you're looking for this stuff, you're not going to find it. You're not going to find it. And it comes at a time where the NBA finals are going on as well. There's soccer going on as well. The Euro Cup ended. The South American Cup, what's it called? The Copa Libertadores, I believe it is, if I'm correct. I hope, please, soccer fans, don't get on me, but I believe it's a Copa Libertadores. Argentina just beat Brazil a few days back. England ended up losing. So they succumbed last Sunday to Italy, right? It was Italy that ended up beating them by penalty shots. Yep. And then the night before, Brazil ended up beating Neymar. So it was a story of Messi and Neymar. So they're in full celebration right now. Argentina is. And now to have this man step into the ring with that country on his shoulders, it's going to be another big feat for that country if Castano is able to pull off this victory. So this is going to be a big one. This is going to be a big one, and I know you know about it. Let's dive in. Let's look at these fighters. Let's talk about the path that they each took to get themselves, to position themselves into this fight, and then from there is just time to wait and watch it, and then I'll catch you guys on the recap episode. But let's jump right in. If we start comparing at the tail of the tape with these two fighters, both of them are same age, 31 years of age. Both of them are orthodox fighters. Jermell has the advantage as far as reach and height. So he's going to be 3.5 inches taller than Castano, and it was noticeable today during the stare down. And he's going to have a 5.5 inch reach advantage as well. Weight, obviously, both of them have to meet at that weight. Experience, as far as professional experience goes, Jermell Charlo carries that experience by way of more fights. He's 35 fights into his professional career, 34 wins, 1 defeat, 18 of those wins coming by way of knockout. He stands at a 51% knockout ratio. Brian Castano has a 17-0-1 record, so 18 professional fights. He has 17 victories, no defeats, 1 draw. 12 of those victories have come by way of knockout. 12 of the 17, he's a hard hitter, and 66, just over 66, reaching 67% knockout ratio for Brian Castano. So he's going to be the shorter fighter. He's going to be giving the reach advantage, but he's done it most of his career. And it's somewhere that he's found comfort in. Patrick Teixeira was an even bigger guy than Jermell, and Brian Castano found a way to mitigate that and ended up pulling out the victory. And that's how he came about becoming the WBO champ. That's the title he's bringing to the corner. Jermell Charlo has the WBA, IBF, and WBC titles. Castano has the WBO championship. So as we look at these guys, now you look at the difference of experience, 35 professional fights versus 18 professional fights. Now, Castano has a bigger amateur record than that of Jermell Charlo, definitely more refined amateur record. He faced some really good names, and Castano started getting promoted here in the United States in years past by 2 big names, or 2 names that actually made something of themselves in the professional ranks, and that being Sergey Derevyanchenko, who Castano holds a win over. He ended up defeating him in the World Series of Boxing. He was already, I think he had just turned pro with 2 victories. He was 2-0 at that time, and he ended up participating in the World Series of Boxing and then ended up beating Sergey Derevyanchenko. And another victory that people have used to, or his team used to promote Castano and to get him to where he's at today, was a victory that he holds over none other than Errol Spence Jr. He ended up defeating Errol Spence Jr. in Venezuela at the Pan Am Games, and from there, I mean, you're looking at Errol Spence Jr., who is highly regarded in the boxing world and arguably the best fighter, not just in the welterweight division, but in the world at the moment. And I say arguably because in the welterweight division, there's Terrence Crawford. Bud Crawford is also held as the best welterweight at the moment, so they interchange depending on who you're talking to. It's a subjective matter where people either think Terrence is the number 1 and Spence would be number 2, or vice versa. But Spence, arguably one of the best boxers in the world, and likely to be the best welterweight at the moment that we have. So Castano holds a victory over him and Derevyanchenko. Derevyanchenko, of course, fought Jermell's brother. Derevyanchenko fought Gennady Golovkin. So he's had some big fights in his career. Danny Jacobs, that's another one that pops to mind. So 12 knockouts of the 17 wins versus 18 knockouts of the 34 wins. When we look at this fight and the way that this fight would be breaking down, It's going to be a matter of styles, right? Now, both of them orthodox boxers, both of them heavy hitters. However, Castano is the better of the two boxers. Castano has better boxing than Jermell Charlo. Yes, I know you're going to disagree with me. Maybe you will, maybe you won't, but a majority of you will disagree with me. I'm not saying Charlo is not a good boxer. He has very good boxing. I really believe that Castano has better boxing. Charlo tends to abandon it. That's the big difference between the two brothers. Jermell tends to be very loyal to his jab and generates his attacks by way of his jab. His jab is what he utilizes to create and to generate his combos. He puts his punches together and all initiated by way of the jab. He doesn't abandon the jab. Jermell does. Jermell will resort. The one thing, the versatility of Jermell Charlo is the one thing that I like about him, because he'll switch from round to round. He could end up boxing. He'll utilize his jab to initiate his attacks, but he abandons it. Even if it's being successful, he'll abandon it because he likes to stand and bang, and he has the power. Out of the two brothers, Jermell, to me, is definitely the stronger puncher of the two brothers. He generates his attacks by way of hooks. He likes to fight inside the pocket. He likes to fight at a close distance, and he usually initializes his attacks by way of hooks and overhands. Overhand rights, overhand lefts, power punches is Jermell Charlo. If we look at the story of these two fighters, Brian Castano has had a little bit better opposition. Well, no, I'm going to take a step back. Jermell has had the better opposition that he's faced as far as ranked fighters. Now, Castano, in his last few fights, he's had some really good opposition. Now, out of the fighters that Jermell has faced recently, and let's say in the last 3 to 4 fights, I'm going to say that the best fighter that he's faced right now, boxing-wise, a good tactician in boxing, was Tony Harrison. Not Jason Rosario, but Tony Harrison. Not Jorge Cota, Tony Harrison. Not even Austin Trout, as experienced as he's been, or Charles Hatley, for that matter. It was Tony Harrison that gave him the most trouble. Let's dive into that, because we've talked about the tail of the tape. We've talked about what's going on up to this, the lead up to this fight. But let's dive in to how they got here. Now, we look at Jermell Charlo. He ended up beating John Jackson to win the WBC Super-Welterweight title. So the title is on the line. It was vacant. This is the same way that this is basically the scenario that presented itself earlier this year for Castano and Teixeira. Jermell ended up running into John Jackson back in 2016. It's 2021, guys. This is May of 2016. So 6 years ago that he's had this title around his waist. 6 years ago, when he first got this title around his waist, Jermell has been on top of this division and running this division for quite a while, even when his brother was campaigning at this division. And it was pretty neat that they're in the history books as being the first brother combo to hold titles at the same time, simultaneously. So he beats John Jackson. He stops him in the 8th round, knocks him out. John Jackson being the son of the famed power puncher Julian Jackson. John Jackson, listen, this is the common denominator that I noticed from all the opponents that have given trouble to Jermell. When they box him, Jermell's in trouble. When they keep him at bay and box him, not engage, not exchange, but box him, they've given Jermell trouble. And that's how he lost the fight. The only blemish he has on his record came at the hands of Tony Harrison. Tony Harrison not only gave him the first loss of his record, but lifted that WBC title from him, and Tony Harrison became the champ. When they box Jermell, he's in trouble. He tends to fall into the wrong gaps, and he tries to engage by way of power, but he finds himself always a step behind and getting outboxed. And the other fighters, his opponents, will be taking rounds from him. This has been something that has, this is not a one or an isolated incident once or twice or three times that it's happened to Jermell. These aren't isolated incidents. There's a trajectory there, and it's happened throughout his career. When they start boxing him, he gets in trouble. Jermell doesn't fall into these troubles because he doesn't abandon his jab. Jermell does. He wants to get his opponents out of there. He's very emotional. That emotion transitions or translates to aggressiveness in the ring. So as emotional as he is during conversations, during interviews, during rants that he goes online on social media with, that translates to aggressiveness. And he has an aggressive come at you phone booth type of style. He tries to get in these phone booth type fights, and every so often he'll run into these bangers that are able to mix it up, and they end up varying their punches by engaging with them, giving him the benefit of the doubt by creating that car crash or that phone booth style, but then they box their way out of it. They're able to reset and box, and that's when they start catching Jermell off guard. They start winning rounds by doing that. Tony Harrison was one of the best examples, especially in the rematch. Even though he got stopped at the end, and Jack Reese had a questionable stoppage because he should have stopped it at one point when Tony Harrison was really in trouble, not when he was at the ropes. At the moment that Jack Reese decided to stop it, yeah, I guess he could justify it, but at the moment that he decided to stop it, if you go back and look at it, Tony Harrison, that was not his worst moment. He was actually okay at that moment, but he was in trouble just a few seconds before when Jermell was actually hurting him. So it could have, if Tony Harrison would have made it out of that round, and would have made it past the 12th round because he got stopped in the 11th, it quite likely would have been a decision win for Tony Harrison, and he would have retained the title that he lifted from Jermell. So good for Jermell that he ended up stopping him. Go back and watch that fight, and you'll see what I'm talking about. He was winning those rounds. Tony Harrison was, and by way of boxing, the first portion of the fight, it was all Jermell, all power, all aggressiveness, intensity, and he was just hurting Tony Harrison. But he mitigated the storm. He composed himself. He boxed very, very well and was catching Jermell Charlo with uppercuts and with clean boxing. Those are the fighters that have given Jermell trouble. The boxers, the pure boxers. Jason Rosario. Although Charlo ended up mangling him, and every time that he would land one of these big power punches, he would end up waddling him, and he would have loose legs. He'd be staggered, Jason Rosario that is, and he'd be wobbling everywhere in there with the Bambi legs. And eventually he ended up stopping Rosario with a nasty body shot to the belly button, it looked like, and where Rosario falls straight back and ends up looking like he's having a seizure at one point. And the fight gets waved off. Rosario is a good boxer, and he was actually boxing his way into that fight. And to mitigate the power, Rosario was able to actually box very well to gain his spacing from Jermell. But Jermell was just too much that night. He came after him. He hunted him down, and that's Jermell's style. He likes to hunt his opponents and get them out of there. A boxer knows how to use angles, how to utilize the ring, and that's what Tony Harrison did. Jason Rosario was starting to find success, ended up getting eliminated. Erickson Lubin didn't even get to execute his plan. He just got eliminated by power shots, and those are the shots that he's hit his opponents with. The opponents end up outlasting that. That's where Jermell ends up falling into trouble. Castano has that style. He likes to stand and bang. He likes the phone booth style fights, but he's able to box his way into and out of those scenarios. Whereas Jermell does not. And that's his weakness. His power has carried him to where he's at today. His power and his combinations and his speed, but it's all aggressive and intense firepower that Jermell throws at his opponents. And he's able to get his opponents out of there. The one blemish he has is because he was outboxed. As questionable as that decision was, and it was questionable at that, because that first fight I could have actually given to Jermell. But the second fight, he was en route to lose against Tony Harrison. Nonetheless, everything's played out the way it has. Jermell is coming off the win against Jason Rosario, and he ended up taking the WBA and IBF title that Jason Rosario came into the ring with that night, and that's how Jermell ended up with all three titles, all three of the four titles. Earlier this year, and that fight happened last September of 2020. So he has a little bit of a longer layoff than Brian Castano does. Castano ended up fighting this past February against Patrick Teixeira. And so he's fairly fresh. He just got out of a camp. He ended up fighting, took a few days off. He even put his honeymoon aside. Recently married Brian Castano put his honeymoon aside and got back into another camp. So he's definitely been the more active of the two. He just got his big fight against Patrick Teixeira for the vacant WBO title, and he ended up beating him by decision. Now, when you look at that and you think about decision, you think that it was a wash of a fight. If you go back and watch that fight, Castano nearly had Teixeira out of there several times throughout the fight, and Teixeira, the experienced fighter that he is, the warrior that he is, the heart and the chin that he presented that night prevented him from taking a knee or bowing out early. And he saw this fight through. Castano was definitely hurting him with his power. And that's where I see the issues with this fight happening tomorrow. If Castano buys into what Charlo is expecting of him to do and what's expecting of him, Charlo's expecting for Castano to come forward, fight inside the pocket, and punches and bunches. And Charlo's going to meet him with firepower. Charlo said it. He said it on interviews, and he's expecting that type of Castano to, that type of fight for Castano to bring to him. And he's going to meet him with power. Castano has to be smart, mix his attack, mix and match it. And if he does decide to engage with them, which there's no way that this is not going to happen, they're going to engage. Let's just hope that it's not an Erickson Lubin type showing from the Castano side, where so he could represent himself a little bit better, and so the fight could actually end up going longer, because this is a unification bout for all the marbles. We want to see this fight go definitely into the second half at the very minimum. If it doesn't go all the way, one thing that I'm scared of happening in this fight is that it gets muddied, that we'll see a really, really good fight and then it gets muddied by the judges. Because big fights tend to have crappy decisions. And let's hope that we don't have that happen tomorrow, where it's questionable and people leave disgusted and with disdain not towards the judges and the sport. And this is such a big fight that it could only attract even more of a fan base if it plays out the right way. If it plays out with a huge knockout, which, looking at these two fighters' knockout ratios, there's going to be people going down. People are going to go down. There's going to be knockdowns, and quite likely that to be a knockout victory for one or the other. Castano has a higher knockout ratio. The better resume is on the Jermell Charlo side. The amateur ranks and the amateur victories that Castano had don't matter anymore, because this is a professional ranks. But as of late, the one draw that Castano has is against none other than Erislan Lara, who used to be a former stablemate of the Charlo twins when he used to be with Ronnie Shields in years past, when the Charlos were kicking off their careers. Erislan Lara, a pure boxer, the highest pedigree that you could think of, ended up fighting to a draw against Castano. So that gives you an idea as the type of fighter. For those of you listening to this that are not too aware about who Castano is and don't want to go, you don't have the time to go do the research and watch Castano fights, this is all you need to know. He has a draw against Erislan Lara, and it was questionable at that. because it was arguably a win for Castano. And a lot of people think that Lara was gifted the draw rather than having received the loss. So that's the blemish on Castaños' record, the one draw that he has. Otherwise, he would be 18-0 right now. But nonetheless, he's still undefeated. He holds that one draw against none other than Erislandy Lara, and that's as high a pedigree as you could get in that 154-pound division. Of course, Lara's campaigning at 160 now, but Castaño ended up going to decision with him. Patrick Teixeira, another really, really good, high-quality boxer. And then you got Jermell, Jason Rosario, Erickson Lubin, Tony Harrison. I mean, come on. That's impressive in itself. Just those names alone. Austin Trout. I mean, we could keep talking about it. The people that he's gone through. Charles Hatley, John Jackson, Joaquim Alcine as he was coming up. I mean, Jermell Charlo is a favorite to win this fight. I just hope there's no controversy. Let the controversy happen at the weigh-in. Let the controversy happen in the lead up to the fight. But let the fight play out in a good manner, in a good fashion. So not only the sport of boxing wins, but us as the fans win and the fighters themselves win, because they won't feel like they got robbed by way of crappy judges or crappy judging, crappy decisions. And they don't feel like they got robbed because of an injury or anything like that. Let's hope that they leave it all out there in the ring. There's no doubt that these two styles that these two fighters possess, are going to be anything but disappointing. This is guaranteed fireworks tomorrow. They both have that car collision style fight, and you're bound to see. I have no doubt that this is going to end up being a phone booth style type of fight, like a Corrales Castillo. Let's hope for that. If anything, at the worst, let's hope for. I mean, they don't fight like Morales Barrera, right? That's the one that everybody always goes to. But if we get something similar, even then, let's go recent, because in case some of you listeners don't know the fights that I'm referring to, even though they're classics, let's go recent. If we end up having a Nakatani Verdejo type of fight, or a Dillian White Povetkin type of fight, regardless whether Dillian White Povetkin 1 or 2, if we end up having a fight like that, we all win. We all win, and we don't even need to take it to the judges, because they will have decided. In 24 hours' time, we're going to have our first ever, dating back to when the 4-belt era kicked off, our first ever undisputed champion in the 154-pound storied division. For Castaño, this is going to bring not just glory to the country of Argentina, but he will be recognized and put side by side with some of the biggest names that have come out from Argentina, those being Carlos Monzon, those being Marcos Maldana, Lucas Matiz, Narvaez, and of course, Sergio Martinez, who's the last Argentinian to ravage through all these divisions, including the 154, but more notably for having taken the titles from Kelly Pavlik and being the man at 160 for quite a while. Brian Castaño would be in that company if he is successful tomorrow night. For Jermell, if he ends up becoming successful, if he ends up winning this fight tomorrow night, the conversations for him to enter the Hall of Fame will begin. He will definitely be the more accomplished of the two brothers, and the conversations can definitely begin, rightfully so, should he win tomorrow, for not only to be in those 10 pound for pound lists, whatever. I never really pay attention to those lists, even though we know who the best fighters in the world are, this and that. I mean, you see it. Us as fans, we see it. Titles don't define fighters. We know who the better fighters are in each one of these divisions. And it's sad sometimes to see that some of these fighters don't get the fights that they deserve and the names in the ring for them to face against because of politics, because of the promotional companies and what have you, right? So more recently, Mayweather saying PBC fighters will stick to fighting PBC fighters. And then for a long time, we had Golden Boy and Top Rank not doing business with one another. We've had now DAZN, Golden Boy, and Matchroom are often putting events together. I mean, you name it. It's let these fights happen, and we couldn't be happier that a fight of this magnitude with this much importance is gonna go down. I can't wait. I hope you guys enjoy the fight. I will definitely enjoy the fight. It looks like there's gonna be a good undercard as well. The co-main event is Rolly Romero. Rolly Romero, who holds the interim version of the WBA title at 135-pound division. He's going to be fighting Anthony Yiggett. Now, Yiggett didn't make weight. He ended up being overweight and actually weighing in the next division up. He ended up weighing in at the 140-pound division. Looks like he's going to be hit fairly big with fines. But he's gonna fight. The fight's gonna happen. Rolly Romero obviously he said it many times, he wants to campaign at 140, but for the time being, he's campaigning there at 135, and he poses trouble for anybody. This is another live dog. We just saw Jojo against Fortuna, Jojo Diaz against Javier Fortuna. We saw Devin Haney against Linares. Earlier this year, Loma just returned by demolishing and destroying Nakatani. Teofimo's about to fight Cambozos, and Rolly Romero's right in that mix. Gervonta Davis was fighting at the 140 division when he beat Barrios, but Rolly's right there, and Rolly is a live challenge for anybody and a dangerous fighter for anybody. Ryan Garcia kicked off the year by beating Luke Campbell, so that's another one. All of them we've basically seen right now. Everybody except Teofimo defend those titles, and then Rolly we're going to get to catch in the co-main event. He's an exciting fighter to watch. He's 13-0, and he's going to be an exciting fighter to watch. The other one is Amilcar Vidal, up-and-coming prospect. Amilcar Vidal, who's 12-0. He fights in the super middleweight division. He's going to be fighting against Emmanuel Alim. That's going to be a 10-rounder, and that's going to be the third fight of the card, or the opener for the show. So, listen, guys, good fights tomorrow. Enjoy the fights. I definitely will. I'll catch you guys on the recap episode. A lot to consider. The fighting styles of these fighters is what's going to tell the story tomorrow. And more so on the Castano side, what he decides to do. We know what Charlo's going to do. We know how he's going to approach this because he hasn't changed his style in the last 4 or 5 fights. But we also know that he likes to vary his attack. He likes to provide a variety. When something's not working, he's very keen on listening to Derek James and takes instruction very well. He follows instructions very well. And he actually changes from one round to the next. He'll be able to change it, whether he abandons the certain style or the instruction that his corner gives him. That's one thing. And we've seen that happen in past fights for Jermell. For Castano, he has to be able to mitigate and weather the early onslaught that Charlo's going to bring to him, and then begin to apply his style of boxing, whether he's going to fight inside the pocket. I don't think he needs to be one-dimensional. He needs to be multi-dimensional if he's going to beat Jermell tomorrow night. He needs to give him different looks, keep Jermell guessing, and he'll be able to be victorious. Jermell is going to come at him. We know that already. And can Castano handle Jermell's power? Because, listen, out of 35 fights, Jermell has won 34 of them. And he applied that same style on that fight where he got the blemish, but he ended up getting a decision loss. So again, according to the judges, he lost that fight. But Jermell did not abandon his style fight. He abandons instruction from time to time, but he doesn't abandon who he is and how he fights. He fights with a lot of emotion, and he is an aggressive. It translates to aggressiveness in the ring for him. Castano, if he mitigates the early onslaught and mixes his attack, he'll be successful tomorrow. It's interesting. It's very interesting. The tail of the tape is very interesting. On paper, this fight should not disappoint. And based on the weigh-in that we saw today, this fight should not disappoint whatsoever. So I'll catch you guys in the recap episode. Thank you guys again for all the love. Thank you guys again for helping this platform continue to grow. And I'll catch you guys. I'll talk to you guys soon. Many more episodes to come. Take care.